Young and Single series. My name is Hannah. If you are new to this channel, we have been sharing great lessons and tidbits on how the young one can navigate the complex maze of adolescence and early young adulthood, where there isn't much responsibility, the person is not in the permanent work world, and the person is also leaving the dependent stage of their parents. Today I want to touch on an interesting subject that bothers many young people. Many young ones are struggling with a particular aspect of life which is common and happens to everyone, sadly. Because young people are immature, are still growing, many of them have been so comfortable in the nest of parents, and as a result, many of them have not experienced this normal aspect of life many people grapple with. What are we talking about today? Failure. 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 Let me tell you a story. And this is my own story. When I was writing my A-levels, I loved mathematics, physics, chemistry, and that was what I wanted to read and do an engineering course. Unfortunately, I didn't put in as much effort as I should, and so my results were not as expected, and I couldn't make it into the engineering sector. I, by God's grace, found my way into another field in the sciences. But that action of not studying well made me, in quotes, fail. I didn't get failed marks totally, no. But I failed to achieve what I intended to achieve. So what would we define failure as? From the Oxford Dictionary, failure is a lack of success. What are the things you want to succeed in? It could also be a neglect or omission of an expectation or a required action. So in my story, my inability to achieve that engineering dream was a failure for me. It is important to realize that there are different areas where we fail as young people. Usually for many young people, it's in the area of their academics, the area of their future career. It's in the area of love and dating, when their emotions are getting, active, and they want to get interested in the opposite sex. You go and talk to a young girl that you are interested in her, and she does not accept your proposal. You see it as a failure. Failure in experiences. You want to go and learn how to swim, play football, do a sport. You want to go into debating. You want to go into one thing or the other. All these are areas where we say we have failed. Now, it could be in business. It could be in negotiation. It could be in interviews. You are going for an interview for a visa to continue your studies outside. You failed the interview. You are going for an interview to get a job. You failed the interview. And why do people say they have failed? One, you say you have failed because you failed to meet a benchmark, a requirement, a standard, a pass mark, society standards, parental expectations, or your own expectations. Any expectation, benchmarks that are not met by people is what people term as failure. So, what may be failure for me may be actually success for another. In exams, there are universities whose pass mark is 60. There are others whose pass mark is 50. And I know another whose pass mark is 100. So 99% in that class is failure. And 60% in another class is a pass. So failure is not fixed. It is dependent on many factors. It is dependent on the expectations, the conditions that are set. Why am I talking about failure today? Because many young people sadly grapple with this topic of failure. The fact that you failed a subject, you failed in a particular situation, doesn't make you a failure. No, there's a difference between failing and being a failure. One is an action or an incident. So I failed in mathematics. It's an incident. And one is a nature. You are a failure. It means that the whole personality, the person, has been determined and said to be a failure. That affects your mindset, your mode, and everything. So everything you do, you see yourself as a failure. That you failed an interview or in mathematics doesn't make you a failure. You only failed. So never mix failed in an incident as an incident with failure as a nature. Many young people walk about and feel they are failures. I failed my parents, so I'm a failure. You are not a failure. You only failed once. It's important to note that challenges abound. They will come. Let's use the example of a little child that is learning to walk. When a child starts walking, a toddler, he takes a few steps and he falls. Does it make him a failure? No. What do? They get up and they continue. If the fall is very hard, sometimes they cry. But they continue until gradually they become perfect in that art which they are learning. In this case, it is walking. So we can use this child to challenge ourselves that the fact that you missed the benchmark in an incident doesn't make you a failure. Keep trying. What are the advantages of failure? Oh yes, failure has advantages. One, you learn from your mistakes. You learn what you didn't do right. You also grow. You become more mature. You become smarter. And then you develop the needed coping skills to handle a similar challenge in the future. So each time you attempt that same action, you know what to do this time. The problem, however, is when there's repeated failure. It brings about fear, and fear can become crippling. I have a young son who went to write his baccalaureate. He failed the first time. He failed the second time. You know what happened? By the third time, he was so confident he would do well. He failed again. When it happens that you are failing consistently, you develop fear. And fear can be so crippling sometimes. There are people who are not able to ever overcome this crippling fear. There are people who never crossed beyond their baccalaureate because they failed a couple of times. But this young boy attempted a fourth time. He did well and got a chance to travel outside his country for further studies. I always have been inspired by his story because it was a challenging time for him. What do you do to overcome failure? Get knowledge in that area where you failed. You're trying to do YouTubing, blogging, you want to do photography, you want to do mathematics. Get more knowledge, get the right teachers, get trainers, get mentors. Find encouragers, people who will spur you on. Don't stay around people who will belittle your efforts, who will make you feel that you are not putting in much. Why many young people fail is sometimes the only ones they stay around are their peers. They don't get the right encouragers, they don't get the right examples, they don't get the right trainers. Many young people sadly could have been much better than they are because they didn't put in much effort. After one failure, 2 or 3 attempts at a particular project, then they give up on themselves. They declare themselves as failures. You are not a failure. You are not a failure. You are not a failure. I've repeated it 3 times because I want it to ring a bell in your heart. Failing is part of life. We have all failed in different areas. When you meet an adult, he's a product of successes and failures. You meet a divorcee, people may say he has failed in marriage. No, he has gleaned experiences. You don't know the circumstances that led to that. When you meet a widow, somebody says she failed. I'm always inspired by the story of Ruth in the Bible. Ruth was a Moabitess. Ruth was married. She was excited. She had a father-in-law, a mother-in-law, a brother-in-law. Then she lost her husband. She lost her father-in-law. She lost her brother-in-law. We will say she failed in marriage. She didn't even have children. Then she now decides that she's going to follow her mother-in-law to a new country. She looked like failure. She looked like she was not going to make it. Can you imagine a foreigner, a refugee now in Bethlehem with Naomi, the widow, two widows, the older and younger widow. People will call them failures. No wonder Naomi says, call me Mara. Because to her life has been bitter. Failure has a way of making you look like you are so bitter. Understand that there's a clear difference between failure and you have failed. One is an event and one is a nature. For every young one listening to me, I want to challenge you. You are not a failure. God didn't create you as a failure. He made you complete. He made you with all that you need to be a success. James 1, 2, and 3. I'm reading all the way to verse 4. It says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. I'm using this scripture to inspire us that we may face trials, and these trials are what we have talked about today as failing in different areas of our life. But continue in this, knowing that it will create perseverance and it will create maturity. Also in Isaiah 41 verse 10, know that the scripture says, so do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. This is so heartwarming. Why? Because God is the only one who can strengthen us when we find ourselves grappling with that situation which we believe we have failed in. When we have God as our chief supporter, when we have God as our encourager, when we have God on our side, there is no way we can fail. God bless you.